Hey there, Take It or Leave It listeners. This is Nick Farringdon.
And this is Ethan Wise.
And we are the hosts of the Take It or Leave It podcast.
A podcast about plants in the world of horticulture and all the things that happen within it.
Yeah, after working in the horticulture industry for many years and starting our own businesses, we decided to share some of our unique stories and experiences and discuss plant-related topics in an approachable, educational, and sometimes hilarious way.
Hopefully. I mean, we're going to laugh.
Yeah.
We'll laugh at each other.
We think it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And then maybe just vicariously through listening to us laugh, you will also laugh, even if you don't understand why you're laughing.
And pick up some fun
mispronunciations of botanical names of plants. You never know what you're going to find in this podcast. But we will focus more on a horticultural theme throughout every episode.
Right. Mixed in with good and bad jokes.
Good and bad information. Just kidding.
Mixed in with both high quality and low quality jokes.
Good and average information. So yeah, we're doing this little snippet here before our first ever Take It or Leave It episode. And we wanted to give the audience a little bit of information about us. We will have a more in-depth intro episode where we go a little bit more into who we are and why we are in this industry, what brought us into the industry of horticulture. So this is sort of an abridged version of our full intro episode that'll be available after this first episode that will happen after this intro. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, totally makes sense. They're not confused at all.
We're entering, let's go back here. So we're going to enter this intro episode before our first episode, which will then have, after the first episode, our full intro episode. There is logic to this, I promise.
Yep.
As a listener, you will pick up on this as you continue on, or this might completely deter you from ever listening to the first episode to begin with.
Hard to say.
Hard to say.
Hit
Who
or
knows?
miss.
Yeah.
Mixed bag.
Take it or leave it.
Right. Oh, should we say why we named it Take It or Leave It?
Well, because while there is science to the world of horticulture, there are definitely portions of it that can be very opinionated. And I always let people know that. Like, as a horticulturist, I have a lot of opinions. Some of them are rooted in what I have been told, what I have experienced, what I have read. Others are rooted in things that I have seen or done or experienced. So
Or directly researched.
So while there is science in the world of horticulture, there's also something to be taken in the fact that how I accomplish something and get a result from it that I find to be optimal might be different than the way you approach the same optimal thing.
So we're going to share some stories from our time working with plants, and we'll let you decide if you want to either take it
or leave it.
So, Ethan, I'll go ahead and send it to you to give our listeners a little background on yourself and how you got to this point with the podcast.
Yeah, so as a horticulturist, I have been working in the industry professionally since 2014. I did get both of my degrees from Illinois Central College. My degree background is in landscape management and turf management. But I have found myself leaning more into being more of a general horticulturist in the sense of, really, I guess, the definition of horticulture, which is to educate people to be a steward of their own environment.
And the art and science of plants.
And I do that more so in a retail setting. That's been most of my experience since 2014, working at different garden centers, being a garden center manager for several years, all the way to starting my own business, the Flora Foundry, where I offer horticultural services. So what I enjoy doing is talking to people about plants and how they can approach their landscape or their environment differently. I think one of the gifts that I have is making the experience of being a gardener less daunting and to encourage people to embrace the trial and error of being a gardener. You can't always be perfect. I have made my fair share of mistakes. I have killed a fair number of plants, and I think that's
Moment of silence for all those plants.
Yes. Everyone listening, just pause. We're not going to stop talking, but you feel free to pause for 30 seconds and then bring back the episode. But yeah, I think what makes you an expert isn't just doing everything right. And this doesn't matter what profession you
Definitely.
are in. Becoming an expert doesn't just happen from doing everything correctly all the time. You have to fail, and then you have to learn from those failures. And being able to discuss that, your successes and your failures with people, allows for them to kind of drop their guard a little bit and accept the fact that they might do the same thing, and that, okay, well, even the guy who does this professionally and makes a living has also made some of these mistakes, and that's okay.
And a good part of your business is consulting related.
Yeah. I like to, see on site and kind of discuss with people, what plant could work better in an area, what could be amended to make existing plants thrive or perform better, while also offering landscape installation as well. But I am also still currently working as a horticulturist in a garden center where I talk to people and sell plants all day. And I really enjoy that part of it. And I've also enjoyed working, doing seminars, discussing a multitude of different things, whether I'm at schools or libraries or doing classes, little make and take classes, or educating people on everything from houseplants to when to prune their roses. Pretty much you give me a stage and I'm going to talk to people about plants.
And you co-hosted a horticulture radio show for a couple years as well.
I did do that. Yeah. I co-hosted a radio program in Peoria, Illinois called Green Thumb, which was on WMBD local radio station. Lasted 2 years. Would have likely lasted longer had I not moved down to the St. Louis area. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing that, as well as doing a little weekly 5-minute thing on the local news for it was called the Midday Gardener, where I would talk, just about anything that I could talk about in 5 minutes that was horticulturally related. But it was doing that little TV spot and doing the radio show that was, for me, a fire in getting this podcast going.
Yeah, and we've both had such a passion for this field since we started in it, and have so much enjoyed talking to each other about plants that we essentially decided, hey, we need to share this with other people who might feel similarly.
Yeah, we've had enough people around us walk away from us and leave entirely while we talk about plants because they don't want to be a part of the conversation anymore.
But it's the ones that stay that make us want to do this.
Yes. Yeah.
It's for you guys.
So yeah, that's my little snippet here. So Nick, what about you? What brought you to that microphone in front of you?
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's in environmental studies with a concentration in international environmental sustainability from Illinois Wesleyan University. And through a project with that program, I ended up getting into the horticulture world through starting to work for a local independent garden center. Initially starting out sort of in retail sales and quickly moving into management and buying and growing, mainly for veggies and herbs back then. And then ended up running landscape maintenance crews out in Colorado for a bit before moving back to the central Illinois area and starting at the nursery where Ethan and I met.
Mm-hmm.
We both started as horticulturists there. And then pretty quickly after that, you moved into the kind of front end of the business, becoming the garden center manager, like you said. And then at the same time, I moved into sort of the back end with plant production. I was the annual buyer grower, annual perennial team leader. So
for a department that was responsible for bringing in $500,000 in revenue.
Yeah, about
every year?
$500,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yep. And after being a grower for them for a while, I also branched out and started my own business called Flora Starts LLC.
To be fair, I took the name Flora from your business. You started with Flora Starts, and I was like, man, that sounds cool. I'm going to go with Flora Foundry. So, yeah, there's definitely, Nick definitely, even though I spoke first, Nick started a flora named business first. That should be clarified.
You heard it here, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Flora Starts is essentially a horticulture consulting and landscape services company. So similar to you, Ethan, with the Flora Foundry, I do both the consulting side and advising people on plant choices, mainly for residential customers.
Whereas I focus more on commercial.
Right. And then I also do quite a bit of landscape design, installation, maintenance, and micro or drip irrigation systems as well. So yeah, that's kind of the quick version of my horticulture background.
And so, but you've had your business for a number of years now. You've had your business for how many years?
Yeah, I started Flora Starts in late 2019. So we're going on the 4th season here.
Wow. So yeah, mine's just started at the end of 2022. So you've definitely given me a little bit of advice, and it's all been terrible. I think I just forgotten that it had started all the way back in 2019, pre-COVID. That's probably why it feels so long ago.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But that quite a ride is what makes you qualified to host this podcast. And both of us have a number of experiences that we can't wait to talk to you about.
Yeah, so now that you know a little bit more about us, we're going to go ahead and jump into our very first Take It or Leave It episode. Do you want to do an intro really quick?
Yes.
Hort homies.
Yeah, what we really should come up with some sort of name for. I guess we don't need to, but for whatever reasons, I like the idea of being able to come up with some sort of...
Hello, everybody. And welcome to
Hi, people who like plants.
And welcome to the Take It or Leave It podcast. I'm Nick Farringdon.
And this is Ethan Wise.
And today we are going to bring you a fun little segment that Ethan found in a book, which he will list the title of here in a second.
like Ethan found in a book. Everybody. Yeah, Ethan.
If you aren't driving right now, everybody please give Ethan a hand for picking up a piece of literature.
I read a book.
Hey.
And in order to get some information that will be repeated on this, I had to read a quarter of that book.
Oh.
Yeah. And then I read more stuff online. It's exhausting. Yeah. But that's what we're here to do. We will read it so you don't have to.
Did I say apples? Did I say we're going to talk about apples?
No, I think I interrupted you.
Okay. This episode is about apples.
Brought to you by apples. Yeah.
And the letter A.
So, yeah, this book that we are talking about, this book that I had read that inspired this podcast episode is called The Botany of Desire. And it is by a person. This is by Michael Pollan, Pollan. And it's not a new book. Copyright is 2001. And Michael Pollan is a professor of science and environmental journalism at the University of California in Berkeley, at least as of the time that this picture and print was made in the book in 2010. Looks like that's when this photo was, or 2013. Anyway, seems like a very interesting person, and he has a unique perspective on plants.
Did you want to read a little bit of the description on the back just to kind of give them a little bit of an idea of what this all covers?
No.
Okay.
No, it's so yeah, this is
you already read a quarter of the book. I don't want you to overdo.
I have to prove to people that I can do this.
Okay.
All right. So this is the back of the book. Every school child learns about the mutually beneficial dance of honeybees and flowers. The bee collects nectar and pollen to make honey, and in the process spreads the flower's genes far and wide. In The Botany of Desire, the book that helped make Michael Pollan one of the most trusted food experts in America, the best-selling author of Cooked and Omnivore's Dilemma, ingeniously demonstrates how people and domesticated plants have formed a similarly reciprocal relationship. He masterfully links 4 fundamental human desires: sweetness, beauty, intoxication, and control, with the plants that satisfy them: the apple, the tulip, marijuana, and the potato. In telling the stories of 4 familiar species, Pollan illustrates how the plants have evolved to satisfy humankind's most basic yearnings. And just as we've benefited from these plants, the plants have also benefited at least as much from their association with us. So who is really domesticating whom?
I like that.
Yeah. So someone that
And Ethan can read.
I can read, not half bad.
Right.
So the cover of the book was familiar to me. I'd definitely seen this cover in passing.
Sure.
And I couldn't tell you where. Maybe when I was in
White cover with a red
fruit.
and yellow apple on the front.
Yeah. And, maybe I saw it in school, whether it was, college or something, and someone in the hort department might have been reading it or something. But when I saw it, I was like, this looks familiar.
Mm-hmm.
But
it was a coworker, you said?
But really, what encouraged me to buy it was I was at work last year, and one of my coworkers was reading this book on her break. And I kind of took a peek at it. I was like, this seems like a fun little read, kind of skimmed through it. It's not like a super long, 240 pages or something.
Sure.
And I fell in love with it. I found it to be a very quick read.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said before, it is what encouraged this podcast episode, because I found it fun to talk about. And if you don't want to read the book, don't worry. We're probably going to cover the other parts.
True, yeah.
Thank you, Michael Pollan, for encouraging us to, or helping contribute to 4 podcast episodes that we're going to do, because I'm sure we will talk about the tulip, marijuana, and the potato. And I bet Michael Pollan, spoiler alert, he does have good information. We'll be able to contribute to those future podcasts.
Yeah, and I'm sure he will enjoy the bump
Yeah,
in sales.
Right. I wonder if you'll...
Weird, my book from '01 just got a bump on Amazon.
Yeah. Should we just get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, so to kind of reiterate, the subtitle of this book is called A Plant's Eye View of the World. And that's really kind of impactful as far as how to interpret everything that he's reading, is kind of viewing it as not just humans controlling nature, but also how nature may and or is controlling us as well. And it's kind of a two-way road.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as I kind of discussed about the apple, and it was quite an insightful read. And as insightful as it was, I was still encouraged to kind of delve and research a little things and kind of fact check in a way.
Sure.
And so I went through a couple different sites. North Carolina's state site had, an interesting perspective on the apple, and was essentially corroborating what Michael talks about in the book. And I had found a couple other sources of people talking about early 15th through 19th century America, and kind of how we treated the apple, and it all kinds of lines up to some of the things that he was talking about. So that was kind of fun, just kind of reading it in other people's writing about, essentially talking what he had talked about. But I got to say, he has quite the gift for taking something that some might find dry, the history of an apple in America, and he just finds a very fun way of making it an enjoyable read. And so just to further read, actually I just have 2 paragraphs here that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll kind of go from there. But it's these 2 paragraphs that I found quite impactful. All right. This is right out of the book. We give ourselves altogether too much credit in our dealings with other species. Even the power over nature that domestication supposedly represents is overstated. It takes 2 to perform that particular dance, after all, and plenty of plants and animals have elected to sit it out. Try as they might, people have never been able to domesticate the oak tree, whose highly nutritious acorns remain far too bitter for humans to eat. Evidently, the oak has such a satisfactory arrangement with the squirrel, which obligingly forgets where it has buried every fourth acorn or so, that the tree has never needed to enter into any kind of formal arrangement with us. The apple has been far more eager to do business with humans, and perhaps nowhere more so than in America. Like generations of other immigrants before and after, the apple has made itself at home here. In fact, the apple did such a convincing job of this that most of us wrongly assume the plant is a native. Even Ralph Waldo Emerson, who knew a thing or two about natural history, called it the American fruit. Yet, there is a sense, a biological, not just metaphorical sense, in which this is or has become true, for the apple transformed itself when it came to America. Bringing boatloads of seeds onto the frontier, Johnny Appleseed, or John Chapman, had a lot to do with that process, but so did the apple itself. No mere passenger or dependent, the apple is the hero of its own story. So kind of just tying into, so that's the end of that, that's end quote. But tying into the fact that the apple, what he's emphasizing is it's very easy for us to take credit for hybridizing or manipulating or creating mutations.
Settling America like it was never populated before us.
Right. And essentially taking full credit for creating, something new out of nature instead of considering the fact that maybe that plant just so happened to be, to personify the plant a bit, maybe that plant was just okay with us manipulating it. There's plenty of plants on this planet that we can't domesticate.
Right.
And while on the other hand, there are other plants like the apple that are more than happy to be domesticated. And what the history of the apple, if you delve back, the apple that we sort of relate to being a domesticated apple, an apple that we would eat, goes all the way back to Kazakhstan. Which is not at all where I think a lot of people...
Was it Kazakhstan and China?
So yeah, there's the Chinese varieties and
Okay.
and this particular apple, so Malus domestica,
Okay.
dates and they can find the lineage going all the way back to Kazakhstan. It is a specific apple that grows there.
Mm-hmm.
And the history is that along the Silk Road, so people traveling from China to parts of Europe or the Middle East potentially came across these apples and would pick the biggest ones to take on them, which just so happened to also be the sweetest ones. And in these hundreds or thousands of miles traveled, you have these apples, you're eating this apple and you toss the core. You just throw the core over your camel, your horse, out the
Sure.
camel window. And that's how so many different natural hybridizations took place. That seed grows and it pollinates with another wild crabapple or apple variety, and then that tree creates an apple, and then the seeds of that tree then grow and pollinate, and it's just never ending. In fact, apples have a very specific trait in which each seed, so when you cut an apple, kind of horizontally from left to right or equatorially, when you cut that and you see those little pockets for where the seeds grow, well, there's, at least one seed in each one of those pockets. Sometimes you find more. So let's just base it on you found a seed in each one of those little pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those seeds, if grown into a tree, will not necessarily have much of a relationship to the tree in which it was plucked from. And all of them could be slightly different too.
Sure.
So that's a very interesting trait that the apple has, and that's what's really allowed for so many hybridizations to take place.
Is that
There's a term
would
for
that be common across other things that are just open pollinated then?
Humans. I mean, it does apply to us too. But yeah, I would imagine there are plenty of other plants that would be associated with. Apples just happen to be a variety that it's just much more extreme. So hold on, I'm trying to find that specific word because it's a fun one and would make sense to be on the podcast here because it's very horty. It's a very hort word. Here we go. Okay. The botanical term for this variability is heterozygosity. So very interesting. And while there are many species that share it, our own included, in the apple, the tendency is extreme. So anyway, but yeah, that heterozygosity pretty much has allowed for the apple to grow in every part of the world, everywhere. I mean, they're just from, like I brought up, Kazakhstan to Australia to Costa Rica to Canada, China. There's very specific different apples depending on where that apple is growing, and then just the apple's ability to adapt to all of these varying climate zones is also very interesting. So just, kind of.
And that variability, of course, we're talking then outside of specific selection and hybridization and things like that.
Right.
Like we see a lot here in the U.S.
And kind of, I like the fact, because even
for commercially produced apples, right.
And I like the fact that he brings up about how it's, and maybe this is just misconstrued here in America, but that we kind of view the apple as being this American fruit. You had said when I was talking about this before
in our intro,
what did you?
Nothing more American than apple pie.
Yeah,
that's the.
Yeah, that's it. It is. It makes so much sense. And yet, the apple, as we know it, the apple that we eat, that we put in our lunchbox, that you put in your kid's lunchbox, that you would bake a pie with, isn't native at all to the U.S. or North America in general.
Yeah.
The native apple to us is a crab apple, something or a variety or maybe a couple varieties of crab apples, but something that was not edible fresh right off the plant.
Much smaller, more tart.
Right. And so, like, to define what an apple or a crab apple is, and this was something that totally made sense, and we just got this actually, speaking of Australia, it was from the New South Wales. New South Wales site was talking about,
North South Wales.
Yeah, that North South Wales.
The home state to the city of East West Sydney.
Yeah, good old West Sydney. Yeah. But they were essentially categorizing what, crab apple is an apple that is less than a 2-inch diameter, whereas an edible apple, or an apple that we know it, a regular apple, is bigger than a 2-inch diameter.
Sure.
And be that as it may, I still associate a crab apple as being something that you really don't want to eat ever. It is extremely tart. It is very astringent, and really only good for throwing at your friends while you're in junior high.
So actually, this just now reminded me of a story from, was it last fall?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been last fall. It was actually the first time visiting at my cousin's new house. I think they had moved in sometime during COVID, way up north central Illinois or kind of northwest suburbs, way the heck up there. And they have a big backyard, good size I think it was on a cul-de-sac, so they have kind of that more triangular size backyard, so pretty good amount of space. And the whole perimeter of the backyard was lined with just kind of miscellaneous types of smaller form factor trees that had been more or less trimmed into kind of a loose hedge over however long they'd been there. And I noticed a few of the trees were crab apples, and they were the bigger, nice,
like the golf ball size crab apple. That's
yes.
what I had in a house that I lived in growing up.
Yeah, kind of getting into that size, and the nice yellow with the red blush. And I was like, ooh, I wonder what these taste like.
Yeah.
Because I see a strange fruit somewhere, and I was like, well, I know it's not poisonous. So,
like we like to say, everything's edible at least once.
At least the one time.
Yeah.
And so I go over and, I grabbed one of the bigger ones, just like travelers back in the day.
You're like, I'm going to take this.
Right. And I try it, and it was tart. I would liken it to, I would actually say it was a little bit more flavorful version of like a Granny Smith apple.
Sure.
So not quite that aggressively
And
tart,
probably
but it
because
was
it was
also
one of the bigger ones too, which makes a difference.
Yeah. And it was also, later season. So they were well into being ripe. And I was like, ooh, this is pretty good. And it was one of the ones that's almost like a little more flat. So you can kind of really nicely bite off around that core.
Yeah.
And my cousin came over at some point, and we were joking in the little small group there that I had just eaten one of these crab apples. And he's like, no, you didn't. I was like, yeah, right over there. I pointed. He's like, no, I don't. No, you didn't eat it. He's like, you're messing with me. And I'm like, no, like it's pretty good. I'm like, come over. We go over the tree. We each pick one out. He definitely made me eat it first because he did not believe me.
Yeah.
And yeah, right there in his backyard, he has these fruit trees that he had never necessarily paid much attention to, or wouldn't think, hey, I'm gonna go put that in my mouth and try it. And
the wonderful innocence of a child.
He's, I think, in his late 30s or early 40s.
The lovely innocence of
a non-horticulturist.
Oh, you did say this was last fall. My brain totally was like, you were a child when you did this.
No. This is like 6 months ago.
Okay. All right. Even though you said last fall, for whatever reasons, probably because my history with an apple, I just like assumed like it was little Nick that went over to this tree and like grabbed a little crab apple and was like, yummy.
Nope. This is full adults, Nick.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
So it was just,
I'm on board.
Kind of a fun little thing of, you never know what you might find in your own backyard that you can. Obviously, you're not going to go out and eat a whole bunch of those, but people make crab apple jelly and stuff like that.
Go start experimenting in your yard, guys.
Just, anything that looks like a fruit, just eat it. Just try it. Don't eat just one though.
Yeah,
eat a.
Sounds like you have to try two times.
2 every hour on the hour.
Right.
Yeah.
My gosh. Please, hey, it's just for liability. Don't do that. We're not really telling you to go in your backyard
just
if it
eat
looks like
that might be a fruit.
So someone's going to be like, well, they're horticulturists. They would know. Yeah, please don't.
Please remove the shell before you try to eat those walnuts. Hey, Ethan, do you hear that?
What?
Oh, it's an ad.
Real quick, thanks for listening to our episode today. You can stay in touch with us by supporting us on Patreon. We are at patreon.com/takeItOrLeafIt.
And we'll have bonus content on Patreon for all of our subscribers there, where you can get extra episodes and snippets from the show that we don't release to all the other platforms.
You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Take It or Leaf It Pod. And you can also visit our website, takeItOrLeafItPod.com. If you have any questions or comments or any stories you'd like us to research or talk about, or hell, send us a picture of a plant you want us to identify, you can send that information to show@takeItOrLeafItPod.com. You can also follow us on our individual Instagrams. I am at Hortwise, HORTWISE.
And I am at Farringdon, NFARRINGDON.
Thanks so much. We'll get back to the episode. Oh, you got me. So yeah, I guess I really did associate this as your story as being you when you were younger, because in my own brain I was just like, Nick, stop talking so I can tell my story. Which
I don't want to hear some old story from when you were a kid.
But we used to have a crab apple when I was growing up in, I don't know, early grade school to junior high. And it was the one that, like you said, produced kind of like those golf ball or slightly larger. I do remember maybe a little bit of that blushing that might happen that you're referring to. Mostly they were just
very like sunny yellow, orangish kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember ours were just kind of more of that yellow or kind of radioactive green color.
Sure.
and it produced heavily every year, and it was right in the backyard. It was probably 15 feet from the back door.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be rotten apples under that tree all the time. And you know what likes rotten apples? Bees.
And wasps.
And wasps. And hornets. That was
At least they only go to the rotten fruit on the ground right by where your feet are, where you can't see them.
Right. And it was one of my, and I'm not putting a target on my mom. Sorry, Mom. It's not the intention of this. But
What's her full name and address?
Right. This is one of my punishments, which was usually well deserved. And she would send me outside with a plastic bag or two and be like, essentially, didn't quite say it like this, but essentially you get to come in when you filled up that bag. And it was my job to pick up all the rotten apples
Full of bees.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I learned to get over my fear of hornets and wasps pretty quickly. I kind of learned, like, don't swing at them. Like, if you...
All right, Ethan, here's a bucket and 2 EpiPens. Go. You're not allowed to. Don't bang on the door until you're done.
My mom loved me. She still loves me. But yeah, I mean, I did learn that if I just pretty much casually pick up these apples and throw them in the bag, I wouldn't get stung or bit or anything.
Yeah.
So I did make the many times that I had to pick up rotten apples, I made it through with very rarely. In fact, I don't really remember ever getting bit or stung. Or maybe I did so many times I repressed it.
We need to do an episode on misconceptions about bees.
Yes. But anyway, sorry, super tangent there, guys. But okay, let's backtrack. Blah blah blah. Blah 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 blah. Native apples. Okay, yeah. So that was the last thing I had said that was actually educational. Native apples were actually crab apples or varieties of crab apples. And that seed, like I had stated earlier, the seed of those crab apples didn't always necessarily produce, an exact tasting fruit or even necessarily a similar looking fruit all the time of its parent plant. So there was a pretty healthy sort of
genetic pool.
Yeah, of crab apples in here. But essentially, just to kind of clarify, these crab apples can grow straight from the seed. Whereas edible apples, or the apples that we associate as apples more or less, are all grafted. That's what allows for that apple to remain being what we want it to be. That's the only way.
Do you want to give them a little quick snippet on just kind of the basic of grafting?
Yeah, so essentially to graft something, you would take essentially a notch out of another tree. So say
or you like a rootstock.
Or a rootstock. It started with taking a notch out of the tree. In fact, it was the Chinese that developed this method roughly 4,000 years ago, where they had learned that they could take a notch out of a type of tree and then
the outer bark.
Yeah. And then insert a branch or a cutting from another more desirable species into that notch. And if done correctly, it'll heal. And then on that branch can now, in a way, it's kind of a parasitic branch that siphons. I mean, it does kind of genetically become bonded with the host plant, but it's it kind of becomes one with that tree and has the nutrients, and can that whole branch and any branches that grow off of that are separate and different. And you can even see that now. You'll find
you can buy apples with
I refer to them as like Frankenstein trees, where
with like 3 or 4 different types.
Yeah, where I work right now, we actually have an espalier pear that in a new garden bed that was just constructed for edibles. And that, so espalier is a type of pruning where it's
espalier.
I'm a horticulturist. So yes, espalier, because it's French.
We're from Illinois.
So
and
here
Missouri.
in St. Louis,
espalier.
We say it how it's spelled. Well, not true, because we'll say window. So wash. We're gonna wash our windows and look at our espalier pear trees. Ooh, just lost some listeners. Espalier, thank you.
Yep.
Let's
French.
sound legit here. And anyway, but that pear is 4 different fruits grafted onto
Very
it.
fun.
But back on track here. So yeah, it was China that kind of discovered that process and has since been improved upon. But yeah, the grafting that you tend to see more in our industry is grafted to a rootstock.
For the purpose of, particular to fruit trees like apples we're talking about, to keep them, say, a dwarf or a semi-dwarf. It's your desirable, the top part of the plant that's grafted to the rootstock is from the desirable plant that's going to have the fruit that you're looking for, whereas the rootstock then limits the growth of the desirable apple portion to usually a certain size, keeping it a dwarf under 10, 12 feet or something like that,
right.
And semi-dwarf, essentially so that you don't have to get on a giant ladder to pick your apples.
Right. You don't need a fire truck engine
purpose.
with a
Yeah.
ladder. Yeah. So that's the apple that we view is pretty much, if you're going to buy an apple and you want to grow one yourself, you are buying a grafted apple.
Right.
And in fact, even a lot of crab apples now are severely grafted. But crab
Most
apples,
ornamentals, it seems
yeah, and that's a whole other episode. But yeah, crab apples anymore that you would buy, they very rarely resemble anything that is a traditional or native crab apple.
And
anymore.
again, to keep a certain size,
Correct.
certain canopy shape,
mostly pretty dwarf.
Yeah.
Most crab apples that you're going to find now are relatively small,
under
20 foot.
Under 20 feet.
Oh yeah.
A little bigger if you never prune them.
True. And so just another kind of interesting thing here about the apple that I found kind of fascinating, something that Michael Pollan, the author of The Botany of Desire, kind of points out, is the apple is sweet. It's sugary. But yet the seeds are extremely bitter due to the cyanide. I mean, it's kind of like a common cocktail fact about, the seeds containing cyanide. And it is a relatively small amount, but enough to really create an extremely bitter taste.
So it's actually, somebody was talking about apple seeds being poisonous a few months ago, and so I took a deep dive on this.
Ooh.
And it ended up, I can't remember now what university source I found that they had researched it, and it's essentially, if you eat the apple seeds and the outer shell of the seed is not broken, it is so tough that your stomach acid can't break through that. So you're just going to pass that apple seed as it was.
Sure.
It's when the inner part of the seed contacts stomach acid, the reaction between those chemicals metabolizes into, is it hydrogen cyanide?
Yeah.
That then is poisonous. But surface area is key. So what they found was, in order to be truly dangerous levels of poisonous, you'd have to have, I think it was 300 or 400 seeds. It was a lot of apple seeds with the shells removed and finely ground into a powder, so that you'd have you'd maximize the surface area for that to metabolize into the cyanide compound that's poisonous for you. So kind of another one of those things that it's like, yeah, they're poisonous, but unless you're very finely chewing your apple seeds and eating hundreds of apples a year, maybe don't worry about it so much.
Yeah, I think you'll be fine.
But consult your doctor.
Hey, Doc, I was listening to Take It or Leave It, and they were talking about eating. First, they told me to go outside.
It sounded like a dare.
And to eat anything that looks like a fruit. Well, I was curious about apple seeds. Can I just start ingesting a bunch of those? And what is that good? Is that going to be good for me?
It seemed like a gamble they wanted me to take.
Yes. And we just lost one more listener. Yeah.
From hydrogen cyanide poisoning.
But, okay. So the apples are sweet. The flesh is sweet.
Mm-hmm.
The seed is extremely bitter due to the cyanide. And some would speculate that that is intentional. And the intention being that the apple has evolved or had evolved and knew, and once again, I know I'm personifying the tree, but come along with me. We're all plant nerds here. And knew that whatever creature might be interested in taking that fruit, whether it be us or because mammals tend to really enjoy sweetness.
Yep.
Whether it was us or some other mammal out there.
Deer love a good apple.
Right. Grabbed that fruit and ate it and disposed of the core somewhere or bit into a seed and spit that out. So it's all potentially part of that need to reproduce. And it's developed a way to get itself to move from one area to another due to its sweetness, but not have the seeds be consumed and or destroyed.
Could that tough outer seed coating also have been evolutionarily beneficial? Because if a deer eats those seeds and doesn't crush the seeds and notice
just poops them out, and now it's in fertilizer. Right. And also they store really well. Apple seeds store for a long time.
Sure.
In fact, it's because of how easily they can store and how long they can store that really allowed for the apple to move across the world.
Yeah.
A bushel of apple seeds transports pretty well.
Right.
But yeah.
Or how your apple at the grocery store could be months old by the time you get it and eat it.
Right, and that is a specific type of way of breeding the apple and kind of figuring out like which apple has a thicker skin. That thicker skin around the apple's flesh is going to help preserve it. Also, we want to develop this apple that's going to start to open up and become firm in these months, but it's going to take a while for it to mature, getting as much sugar into it, which can also kind of be a little bit of a
high
preservative.
Sweetness, high shelf stability.
Right. It's very, very much goes into the world of the apple. But here's another little bit of history here for especially us here in North America was when you think about Johnny Appleseed, that's kind of, he is in a way a caricature of American history, Johnny Appleseed. But he was a real person, and I brought him up. I referenced him when I was reading that paragraph from the book. But his name was John Chapman, and he literally traveled through many parts of the United States and just selling his apple seeds. And the story that you might have heard as a kid was he's responsible for growing the apple. And I remember reading this book, and these
he's
big
out
fun,
in a big empty farm field,
he's
scattering
just, scattering
seeds.
apple, and nice little myth. And, there's all these fun colored apples around him. But the reality is he was selling apples and growing them and helping people grow their own orchards so that they could make cider. That was what apples were used for a very long time, up until Prohibition, really. I mean, in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, things started to kind of, the apple started to become more marketed as being this sweet, delicious treat. But it was really Prohibition that, kind of really put a halt to alcohol, that focused that made the apple have to be rebranded. But so prior to that, people were growing them to make booze. It was cider. Now we refer to alcohol.
At the time, water could kill you still.
Right. Exactly. So, and people just like being drunk. So
I guess that too.
Right. Yeah. So now we refer to cider as hard cider. And what really allowed for there to be a distinction between cider and now what we refer to as hard cider is literally refrigeration. That's really the key element that allowed for us to keep cider from turning into alcohol.
And pasteurization.
And yeah, exactly. But yeah, prior to that, they would make cider and it would be alcoholic and it would taste good.
Fermented.
Right. And it would essentially, kids even drank it too. Because it was sometimes some places it was more accessible than water or milk or something else, that was
safer.
Yeah. And like we brought it because it prevents certain pathogens from, the yeast eats certain pathogens that could in the water that could potentially be toxic to us. So that was also kind of a very interesting thing to learn about with regards to that fruit. So yeah, leading up to Prohibition, here's another little fun history snippet. So in the industry, and people who aren't in the industry who just have an affinity for fruit trees, you might be familiar with the Stark Bros. Stark Bros are a relatively well-known vendor. You can buy from them retail, but they also sell
trees.
Mainly. Trees. Yeah, trees, specifically fruit trees. And they've now expanded to a slew of edible plants, but their roots go back to, apples.
Yep.
And yeah, so the Stark brothers who now have expanded to having this huge kind of platform where they grow and sell a multitude of different fruits and even sell wholesale. So it's not unfamiliar to people who might be buying on a wholesale level to, potentially look at what Stark Brothers has. Or even I've recommended to some people before, like, hey, check out Stark Brothers. Check out their website. You might be able to
do a lot of mail order.
Yeah,
too, right?
you can order directly from them.
Potted or bare root.
Correct. So the Stark Brothers were holding this particular competition, this apple eating competition. And this particular grower brought his apple, and the Stark Brothers, they tried this guy's apple, and they liked it so much they bought this apple seed from him and essentially the rights to it for $3,000, which
is a ton of money back
in
then.
1890. Yeah, $3,000. That's a lot. So I don't feel like they ripped him off.
Sounds like a good deal.
It sounds like a pretty good deal. And they named it the Delicious Apple. They kind of rebranded that apple, and that was essentially the apple that led, in many ways, the rebranding of the apples being sold as something that was a sweet, sugary snack.
And so you said they named it Delicious. Was that closer to what we know as the Red Delicious?
And the Golden Delicious.
Yeah.
Okay. And so from that Delicious apple came the Red and the Gold Delicious, both of which are still...
Gold Delicious is a universal pollinator.
Right, exactly.
Early, mid, and late season apples.
Yeah, the Red Delicious and the Golden Delicious apples are essentially like some of the main apples, like top 5 apples that are used to create many of the other apples that you find at a grocery store.
In hybridization.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And yeah, like I said, they kind of helped lead the way into what we now know as an apple, which is sold as marketed in some ways as a sugary but yet healthy snack, even though it used to be used to make booze. So it's just kind of an interesting...
And started out too tart to eat.
Exactly. Yeah, what an interesting history the apple has led. So yeah, that's my little bit of a history lesson with some tangents and some grammatical mistakes.
This wouldn't be take it or leave it without tangents.
True. Yeah.
Tangent or leaf it.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. So yeah, that's our episode for today. Going into that, thanks for listening and going along. Oh, you know what, Nick? Do you have any questions?
Oh, what was the name of the guy that the Stark brothers bought the apple seed from? I asked that because I know Ethan didn't write it down, and now he's going to have to get out his computer and look it up.
As soon as I find his name, I'm going to have to go back to the history of what he did that we intentionally left out.
My money's still on his first name being John because there weren't a lot of guys around back then, and a lot of them were named John.
Jesse Hyatt, from Peru, Iowa.
Peru. Okay. So Ethan has found the name.
Okay.
After I've edited out tens, if not singles of minutes.
Yeah, it took you. Everyone else is going to be saved from the amount of time that I spent trying to find this guy's name. Really glad I finally did, because we omitted his history because I couldn't remember his name. Isn't that like a kind of like, ooh, that's kind of a
we
rough...
just censored him right on out of there.
What's his name? What was all that he did? I don't know. I mean, I know, but we don't know his
Just
name,
leave it
so
out.
leave it out. Okay, so Jesse Hyatt. And Jesse, here's what you missed. Jesse Hyatt had this particular apple growing on his property, and he mowed it down. He
Didn't know what it was.
Yeah, he thought it was a weed.
Yeah.
And he mowed it down, and then it grew back. And so he mowed it, and it grew back, and he mowed it. And finally, he just decided, screw it, I'm going to let it grow. And let it grow for about a decade. And it started to produce fruit, and he ate it and was like, holy crap, this is the best apple I've had. And I'm used to eating unseasoned, dirty carrot soup, so I know flavor. I cut the mold off my cheese and eat dirty root soup. So
This is going to be our opener now.
So I know what tastes good. And luckily he was right, because this is the apple that he brought to this particular fair, this international fair that the Stark Bros were hosting. And essentially more history that I left out because I couldn't remember his name. The first year that he entered that apple, something happened, and the documentation of who the person was and where the apple came from got lost.
Oh.
And so they had no idea they had this apple, and they were like, dude,
He was just the Cinderella of apples.
yeah, exactly. Oh my God, that's a great way of putting it. And they had no idea who had entered in this freaking delicious apple, and got lucky because he came back the next year because he was a little sour. Was like, how did I not win? Like, this is really bogus.
He was a little Granny Smith about it.
Ooh, yes. And entered that apple again. And the Stark Bros were like, thank you. We've been waiting for you. And they put the apple husk over his foot, and they're like, it fits.
I wasn't ready for that one.
And sure enough, they were like, here's a boatload. Here's more money than you've ever seen ever. And bought the apple. And yeah, here we are.
And that's how we have
Yeah,
the apples we
over
have today.
100 years later is this great little fun story of, in part, what led to what we have right now as an apple.
That's incredible.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that I remembered that I found his name.
Property. Yeah, right.
Or else none of our listeners would have known this.
Right. Seems like a key piece of the story now that we have it.
It's terrible research. What is this, mainstream news?
Right.
All right. Well, there we go.
Excellent.
Thanks for asking that question, Nick.
All right, everybody, that's going to wrap us up for this week. Again, I'm Nick Farringdon. This is Ethan Wise.
Yeah,
he
thank you.
knows that guy's name who discovered the delicious apple, whose name was
Jesse Hyatt.
Nice. That was you only had half a second more there before you lost
I
all
almost
your
said
credibility.
James. Man, I feel like this episode I lost credibility. I said Espalier instead of Espalay. Didn't even know the name of a key person associated with this story that I wanted to talk about.
I think this is going to be the opening.
Yikes. Well, hope I didn't lose you all, guys. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for clicking in.
Yep. Thanks for tapping that button. Yep.
All right. Don't forget to check the episode description for links to any of the articles that we talked about. We'll throw a link in there for the book, The Botany of Desire, that initially inspired this Apple topic for today. We will have our individual and the show social media links in there, our website, emails, all those ways for you guys to contact us in case you have questions, have ideas for future topics that you'd like to hear about more. And until then,
Bye.
I'll leave. Bye. See you guys.